Hello and welcome to the Sacred Rainbow Current Global Online Summit, bringing together the multifaceted custodians of our planet and humanity to reveal deep truths, wisdom, and tools to enable the guardianship of our planet for the future generations. Sacred protection, connection, and the holding of earthly and cosmic light portals is potent to humanity's highest timeline ascension. My name is Kerry Bridget McCrory, and I am your summit host and creator, airing from the Cunninglen Valley in the Sperrin Mountains of Northern Ireland, Iru. My mountain is called Spatnaduya, and my river streams from the mountain mists and crevices into the burn below. Today I am joining Father Seán ÓLaoire, who was born in County Cork, Ireland. Seán has lived in Kenya for 14 years and has been living in California since 1987. Father Seán ÓLaoire was born in Ireland and earned a BSc degree, major in mathematics, from the National University of Ireland. Ordained a Catholic priest in 1972, he spent 14 years working in Kenya. He is multilingual and has an MA and PhD in transpersonal psychology. He is a licensed clinical psychologist in private practice. He is a co-founder and the spiritual director of a non-denominational community called Companions on the Journey, based in Palo Alto. Father Seán ÓLaoire is the author of 5 books and co-author of a 6th. And I'm just going to get you, Father Seán, to say hello to everybody, and maybe if you can tell us the name of your first book as well.
Hi to all of you out there, and a million thanks for joining this effort to save our planet. And so the first book I wrote actually was in Swahili. It was called Ukweli ni Nini, which means what does truth mean? And then the first one I wrote in English
What is truth?
Yeah, what is truth?
Yeah. And that was written and published in 1983.
Right.
And I got you to say it, Seán, because you would say it better than me, but in English language it is What is Truth? And the second book that you wrote was Spirits in Spacesuits, published in 2003. And then we have Souls on Safari, which was published in 2006 and translated into German in 2007. A Sensible God, which was published in 2008. What Your Life is Telling You About Who You Are and Why You're Here, which was published in 2013. So that was in relation with Matthew McKay, PhD, and Ralph Mittenzner, PhD, and translated into Korean in 2015. And more recently, the 6th book, Setting God Free, Moving Beyond the Character We've Created in Our Own Image, published in 2021. So you'd be well known, Seán, all around our globe.
As we say in Cork, better known than a begging donkey.
Oh, no. Okay. So today our interview topic is Gaia, a feminine face of God. And I'm very excited to hear what you have to say about the feminine face of God. And just the title, that's amazing. You know, it says so much in itself. And what, can I ask, is the Christa consciousness?
Right. So sometimes I like to seed my dreams, Kerry, when I'm going to sleep at night. I have a thought that I want some input from the other side, across the veil. And so at one stage I asked the question, what is Christ consciousness? And I got a very pithy response that said, Christ consciousness is the permanent awareness of the inner divinity of all creatures, so that everything that exists is actually a word of God made flesh. There's a great statement at the beginning of John's Gospel, which is called the prologue, where it says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, this is the English translation. In the original Greek, would have said logos. And logos is the kind of the morphological agent, that which brings form out of matter. And so we read in John's Gospel, in the beginning was the logos, And the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. All things were made through it, and without the Logos was made nothing that was made. And the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us. So, most Christians think that this kind of refers only to Jesus Christ, that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. And that is not true. Everything that exists in some senses is an articulation of the divine. There is nothing except God. I like to say sometimes that, everything that exists is simply God in drag. There is nothing that doesn't have a divine essence in it. And so Christ consciousness then is the ability to have that permanent awareness, so that everything I encounter, whether it's bunny rabbits or oak trees or coyotes in my forest, that they're all articulations of God. Now, when I think of Krista consciousness, then that's specifically the kind of the feminine aspect of God. So I had a really powerful vision many, many years ago, in which I saw souls stand in front of God and volunteer for incarnation in various ways. And a lot of souls are volunteering just to be human beings. But there was this great soul who volunteered to animate a planet. And the soul pointed to the third rock from the sun in a particular solar system and said to God, I volunteer to go onto that rock, that third rock from the sun in that solar system, and I will begin to breed life until I breed a form of life which will be aware of its own inner divinity, and ipso facto, the divinity of all other creatures with which it shares the planet. And so, this extraordinary soul, this Mahatma, to use a kind of a Hindu concept, this great soul, animated this rock. And then it goes through various stages. So initially, it's just a rock. It's a physiosphere, just a spherical rock. And then at some stage, the next stage, she creates an atmosphere. And the atmosphere is the womb of the planet. In order to give life, she needed to create an atmosphere around this rock. And so stage 2 was the kind of the creation of an atmosphere, a womb. Stage 3 then was the biosphere. Now that she had a womb, in the planet, now she could give birth to flora and fauna of various kinds. And so she spent 3.7 billion years now, evolving these flora and these fauna until finally Homo sapiens sapiens arrived about 70,000 years ago. And with Homo sapiens sapiens, there was the opportunity for the first time ever of a self-reflective being who could actually realize that it was God stuff and look around and see that everything else it shared the planet with was also God stuff. Now, there are 4 more stages to that ascension process of Gaia, I believe. And the next stage is the noosphere. So that there's a sheath of consciousness that surrounds the sheath of life, of the biology. And we're in transition from the biosphere to the noosphere. Tyler de Chardin called it the noosphere, the kind of the mind sheath. And so things like the internet are connecting people consciousness all around the planet. But the transition from biosphere to noosphere is really, really dangerous, because we can create technology that could literally destroy the physiosphere itself in a nuclear holocaust or wars. And so this transitionary phase we're in right now, as we move from biosphere to noosphere, is fraught with danger and fraught with possibility. But even, the noosphere is not the end of the journey. There are 3 more stages after that, I believe. The next stage I call the anima sphere, anima as in Latin for the soul sphere. So it's again for us to realize that the planet itself has a soul. It's not just a rock. It's not just an atmosphere that bred life. It has a soul. Beyond that, I call the pneuma sphere. That is the spirit, the kind of the holographic fractal of God that is above the animosphere. And then finally, you have the cosmosphere itself. God articulating herself, as a cosmos. And so that was a vision I had maybe 30 years ago at this stage. And so at this stage then, I'm beginning to look at planet Earth very, very differently. It's not a rock. It's not just an accident. It's not just a planet that's whirling around the sun. It is an animated entity where a great, great soul volunteered to actually animate, a rock, and ensoul it in the very same way that you and I, when we volunteered for incarnation, we were animated. There was a soul. I call it your soul self. So I distinguish for human beings between, my physical body, that's kind of the lowest vibration I have. And then above that is the etheric body, the elan vital, the kind of the system that's homeopathy speaks about, or acupuncture, or meridian points in Hinduism. So it's an energy system which is vibrating at a higher frequency than the physical body. And then above that is the astral body. It's the body we inhabit when we're dreaming or when we're having visionary experiences. And at that level, there is neither time nor space nor matter. You know, according to science, the four great elements of science are space, time, energy, and matter. But at the astral level, there's no space, there's no time, and there's no matter. So I have a dream where I'm back in my childhood home in Ireland with my grandfather, who died in 1956. And now I'm transported 6,000 miles to the east and 66 years back in time, because there is no time and space. So at the astral level of the body, we go beyond space, beyond time, and beyond matter. And then we go to the next level, which is the mental body. And this is the place that Plato will call the ideal realm. It's the place of the archetypes, you know, the blueprints, the archetypal, the architectural blueprint that will be, you know, hard copy will be a physical body. Above that then is the psychic body, where we have extraordinary capacities, psychokinesis, telepathy, clairvoyance, clairaudience, precognition. You know, so all these are part of who we are as we ascend. And then above that is the soul self, this holographic fractal of God. And then ultimately, the Rosini God herself. And so in this journey where we're walking hand in hand with Gaia, we have to walk at all of these different levels. We're not just thinking about the physical walk, you know, and we're not just thinking about our physical selves. We're thinking about God stuff, you know, at all of these different levels. And therefore, the companionship and the mutual responsibility is about protecting each other at every level of these stages.
Yeah. So we're like multi-dimensional beings. Like, is that
Absolutely.
how it felt to you whenever you were having the dream or the vision? Like you were experiencing multi-dimensions
Yeah.
all
Absolutely.
together.
So I have a theory of origins, Kerry. Just the last few weeks in my own community here, I gave a series of lectures on the kind of the biblical notion of creation, and then the scientific notion of creation, and then my own theories of creation. And this is a theory that came to me 2 years ago. I was really, really sick. I had a very, very high fever. And when I get high fevers, I get really powerful visions. Like when I was in Kenya every year, I got malaria and I would have very high fevers and I would have these extraordinary visionary experiences. So 2 years ago, I had this experience, and in it, you know, I had an encounter with God, with Source, and the realization that initially God is lonely, because if God is all that exists, no experiences are possible. If there's nothing with which to relate, we can't generate experiences. So the idea of God existing alone, you know, that's a God who cannot experience. And so God wanted to generate experiences. So the first stage was what the Hebrew language will call netzotzim, that God self-fractures into billions of souls, and they're holographic fractals. Now, a hologram is an entity that contains the totality of itself in every one of its component parts. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. So God self-fractures into these holographic fractals. And now these souls are generating experiences for God. We're like the bees that leave a hive in the morning and go out to gather pollens and stories and come back to the hive. That's our function. So that was the first stage. There was God, and then there was the netzotzim, the fractals. And then at some stage, God called the first, I call it the first synod, where God decided, let's you and I co-create something. So God and souls are now going to create something, you know, as a team. And the first thing they created was a cosmos. So they're watching this extraordinary cosmos unfolding with galaxies and planets and animals of various kinds, and they're witnessing it. It's what Buddhism will call turiya, the ability, the witnessing consciousness. And that went on for, you know, eons of time. And then God called a second kind of a council or a second synod and said, can we do even better than that? And the decision was made, let's see if we can actually participate in the cosmos, not just be observers of it, but be participant observers. That's a phrase from cultural anthropology. And in Buddhism, they'll call it turiyatita, the ability to incarnate and do my very, very best in my incarnated form, but not identify with incarnation, to realize incarnation is a role I'm playing, but my essence, you know, is the soul self, the witnessing consciousness. And so then we created these avatars, what I call these space suits, you you know, to hold our spirits for us. And various souls incarnated, you know, as trees, as bunny rabbits, as human beings, and as I said, some of them as planets, or even solar systems. There's an extraordinary soul which is animating our solar system. There's an even greater soul that's animating the Milky Way galaxy. So everything that exists actually is animated by an avatar from Source itself. And so it becomes really, really important then that we realize we exist at all these different levels. So we have to participate in and play the best game we can at every level, but not identify with that level. So we must disidentify with the lower versions of self and re-identify with higher and higher versions of ourselves until finally we realize that there is only God. This is a game that God is playing. Hinduism will call it the game of Lila.
Yeah, and I feel as well, like even like our chakra centers, they're
Yes,
like we
yes.
universes, portals of their own. And that
Absolutely.
like maybe like the most important portal that we can go into to open up to the higher dimensions. There's a very like special gate or key at the heart
Yes,
portal
yes.
at the, you know, because it's all well and good to know things on a mental level. And, you know, you sort of had some of your initiations through when you weren't well and your fever went up, and to sort of remind you a wee bit of shamanic things that happen some people. So that opened it. But whenever you think of maybe the average everyday person and they don't have maybe a clue, how do I have these experiences?
Yeah.
You know, so I think of the heart as
Yeah.
a
Yes.
center, like a universe, you know,
Yeah.
if we're able somehow to ease that opened because life may have shut us down,
Yeah.
you
It's a
know.
great point. I agree completely with you, Carrie. And so I differentiate between knowledge and wisdom. I think that knowledge is data which are generated by the sensorium and processed by the brain, whereas wisdom is data that are generated by the soul and processed by the heart. So only the heart can connect with wisdom. The brain can connect with data and information and knowledge, but it can't contact the higher realms. So that only happens through you're absolutely right. The heart chakra is the key here because that puts us in touch with our innate wisdom, the God voice within us. So how do we go about opening up the heart chakra? I think, you know, there are various ways that humans have discovered over the ages. You know, one of them obviously is meditation, you know, that you enter an altered state of consciousness. The other one is imagination. And again, I differentiate between imagination and fantasy. Fantasy is the ability to make up stuff that's not real. Imagination is very different. Imagination is the ability to volitionally shift my state of consciousness, enter into different dimensions, encounter energies and entities that reside there, converse with them, learn from them, and then bring it back into this waking state of consciousness and cross-fertilize it with the kind of with human knowledge. And so, you know, anything that alters your state of consciousness is a portal. So meditation does it. I think personally that spending time with little children, particularly between the ages of 2 and 5, before they're schooled, you know, and educated, because they're constantly moving backwards and forwards through the veil, you know, the veil that kind of is diaphanous between the mystical and the mundane. Kids are crossing backwards and forwards constantly. So to join their games, not patronizingly, you know, pat them on the head and say, that's lovely, your imaginary friend. To realize they're having real encounters across the veil, and to not just watch them, but see if you can participate in their game and become a child again. Jesus Christ would say, unless you become as little children, you won't even enter the kingdom of heaven. So how do you become like a little child? It's about asking the really deep questions. It's about being prejudice-free. It's about using your imagination. It's about traveling across through the veil again and again and again. So spending time with little kids, spending time in nature alone, you know, particularly, you know, in an area where you live or I live, where, you know, without the conversation and the noise of a companion, you're listening, you know, to the sounds of the birds or the gurgling of a stream. You know, are you watching a spider build a web? You know, you're watching the leaves, you know, dance in the breeze. And so spending time in nature is really, really important. And then there are involuntary ways, like for instance, pain. And for me, particular, a fever is a kind of an involuntary mechanism where I'm, you know, catapulted into a different arena. Or for some people, experiencing some kind of a tragedy, you know, the loss of a child, for instance, you know, so watching a car accident where you're transported momentarily and you have a different version of reality because time is totally different. And so there are ways in which we can kind of voluntarily create altered states of consciousness. I think great liturgy should be able to do it for us. I think music can do it for us. I think dancing can do it. Art can do it. So there are various ways that human beings can voluntarily shift their states of consciousness, and then they're accessing reality through the heart rather than through the head.
Yeah, and the imagination one is such an important one, because I feel like, especially with our young people, and maybe even when they're very young children, that's blocked off on them because, the way life is and being on devices, and it's like this other important portal is totally shut down. And we do what you said about bringing ourselves and our children into nature to really watch the patterns and open the gateways. It's so, so important.
Absolutely important.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a real movement, unfortunately, a calculated movement to separate, a few years ago, another question I asked when I was going to sleep at night, I wanted an answer. And I wanted to know, is there a difference between sin and evil? And the answer I got, 4 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, and the answer I got was, sin is the kind of the breaking of a culturally created precept, such as breaking a human law. Whereas evil is a cosmic conspiracy using human intermediaries to separate souls from source. That there's actually literally a kind of an off-planetary kind of mechanism trying to separate humans from source or from God. Now, modern technology, for all its benefits, is aiding and abetting in that process. So we're encouraging kids now to live in a totally fictitious world with kind of with screens of various kinds. So it's creating a world in which you're not going to need human companionship anymore, or kind of friendship, or spending time with other human beings. You can have a virtual reality in which you can indulge your fantasies and live in a totally fictitious world that does nothing to kind of grow your soul. And so for me, the conscious effort to kind of separate ourselves on a regular basis from just the mere technology of creating altered states of consciousness that deliver unreal worlds to us, worlds that don't connect us with God or with each other or with nature, that's really dangerous. We have to be really, really careful about not getting sucked into that. Now, technology has its uses, obviously, but it certainly has its abuses as well.
Yeah, and we have to be so aware of it. We have to be so tuned in to give, especially your young, a chance.
Yeah,
And a
absolutely.
lot of adults themselves will not even be aware that they're being closed down, or that the imagination's been shut off. So, uh-huh.
So I think then, for instance, coming from a Catholic background as a Catholic priest, I'm trying to rescue what's of value in the Catholic system and separate myself from the fundamentalist dogma of it. And so what the core liturgy for me, now 52 years as a priest, is the celebration of Eucharist. And I look at, what did Christ, how did he define Eucharist? And there are 4 key words. It's like a code to Eucharist. He took, he blessed, he broke, and he distributed. And that's the essence of Eucharist. And Eucharist in Greek simply means thanksgiving, or being grateful for. So what does it mean that he took? It means that Christ is saying you must receive graciously. You can't grab or pillage from nature. You have to receive gratefully from nature. The first thing is taking with gratitude. The second thing he said, he blessed. And blessing is not the imparting of benediction to a previously inert substance. It is the recognition of the inherent sanctity of everything that exists. So everything that the planet offers us is already sacred. Blessing it is the recognition of its sanctity, not the imparting of benediction to a previously inert substance. That was stage 2. Stage 3, he broke. And that is to try to create models of distribution, so that what Gaia is offering us is shared equally among the people of the world. And then the 4th one, he distributed. Now you have to walk the talk. So when I look at the words of Christ, where he says, this is my body given for you, this is my blood which is shed for you, it is Gaia saying that as well. It's not just Jesus Christ saying that, it is Gaia saying that. Everything that we need. There's only one thing we need as human beings that's not supplied by Gaia, and that is light. Light is coming from the sun. Everything else we need to survive on planet Earth is given by the planet. Air, water, food, shelter, clothing, soil, everything we need is given us by planetary. Sunlight is the only ingredient that comes from the outside. So in some senses, to understand Gaia, to understand the planet, is to understand the Eucharist. And so our response to it must be the same. It is to take, not to grab, or to hoard, or to devastate. It is to take with gratitude. It is secondly to bless by recognizing its inherent sanctity. It's not that human beings are kind of adding something by way of benediction to it, but are recognizing the inherent sanctity of Gaia herself. And then creating models of distribution so that the gifts that Gaia gives us are distributed to everybody. And then the fourth one is the actual walking the talk, not just creating theoretical models of distribution, but actually going ahead and sharing the goodies and the food with everybody else. So I say every time I celebrate Eucharist, I look at not just the liturgy of Eucharist, but the sociology of Eucharist. What is our relationship to the planet and its denizens? And by denizens, I don't just mean the human beings that live here.
Yeah. A good few years ago, I had a dream, Seán, Father Seán. It was, I dreamt it was inside a house, and outside all the windows were broken on the ground. The glass had broken inside the house. Next, I was outside the house. It was a very strange dream. And as I was outside the house, everybody was queuing up to receive Holy Communion.
Wow.
And then whenever it came to my turn to receive the Holy Communion actually dropped to the ground and it turned from white to red.
Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
How did you interpret that for yourself, Carrie?
I remember sharing it with a friend, an older friend, where we've done a lot of internal work together through different avenues. And I did think whenever we come to the bottom of it, that it was related something to do with maybe that the principle of the divine feminine has been dropped.
Yes. Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So just listening to you as a psychologist now, one of the things that would come up for me, if it were my dream, is that, as we said before, windows are kind of the ability to be engaged with the outside, but not be in contact with it. So we have a visual connection with it, but that's the only connection. And so the broken glass somehow means that this limitation, or this kind of a barricade between the interiority of the house, which represents the psyche of the soul, and the external world, that's gone. And now you find yourself outside. Now you're participating fully in the reality, and you're joining people receiving communion. And a communion is sharing not just in the body and blood of Jesus, but in the body and blood of Gaia, or the body and blood of God incarnated in Christo consciousness. And it drops to the ground, and his blood is like, blood is the essence par excellence of the life force. So when you look, for instance, at in Swahili, the word we use for a human being is binadamu. Bin means a child of, and Adamu comes from the Swahili word damu, which means blood. And in Hebrew, you have the same notion. And dam is blood in Hebrew, and Adama is earth or soil in Hebrew. So in some senses, human beings are composed of the soil of the earth, and the blood, in some sense, the divine force that animates that. And so the communion falling to the ground and turning red in some senses, now you have the soil of the earth mixing with the blood of the divine. And it's what the priest does at Mass. When I'm saying Mass on Sunday, I have altar wine in the chalice, and then I pour water into it. And that represents the mixture of the divine and the human, water representing humanity, and the wine representing the divinity. And so in some senses, it is mixing the divine and the human. And so there you are standing outside the house. In some senses, even the psyche that you inhabited is too small for you, and you needed to leave it. And the first part of leaving was the shattering of the barricade between you and the outside. And now you're outside and you're free, and you're receiving this kind of communion, which is the admixture of your humanity with your divinity. And it's represented by the blood on the ground.
Yeah. And it was interesting too, because the glass was gone. Once it was outside, the glass was gone.
Yeah.
But somebody did point out to me once as well, that like the blood from a woman is mostly life-giving. it's
Absolutely.
life-giving, whereas maybe the bloodshed by men is
Yes.
more war.
So that's fascinating, because when you think about it, as Christ is dying and at the Last Supper, which means he has less than 24 hours to live, he's going to give one final kind of homily to these knuckleheads that have been with him for 3 years and had no idea who he really was. He's kind of tearing his hair out. At the Last Supper, Philip says to him, Lord, you keep showing us, telling us about the Father. Show us the Father, that will be enough for us. And Christ says, Oy vey mir. Philip, I've been with you for 3 years and you still don't realize that if you see me, you see the Father? That if you see anybody, you're seeing God. If you actually see a lily, you're looking at God. If you look at a bunny rabbit, you're looking at God. Can't you realize that? That if you eyes to see, there's no place where God is not. So at the Last Supper, he's thinking, I need to leave them with one final symbol. And of all the symbols he could have left us with, he left us the symbol of the Eucharist, which is feeding us from his own body and blood. Now, what is that? That's precisely what a woman does. When she's pregnant, she's feeding the baby from her own body and her own blood. And when she gives birth to the baby, she puts it on her breast and she's still feeding it from her own body. And so of all the symbols he could have chosen, he chose this extraordinary feminine symbol of giving his body and his blood to sustain life, that's the feminine principle par excellence. So that's what I would talk then. That's the difference between Christ consciousness and Christa consciousness. Christa consciousness was the last symbol that Christ left us. And every woman does that. Every mother does that.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true.
Yeah.
It's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And at the beginning as well, whenever you talked of the whole earth and the way the whole earth is the womb, like that's truly what it is.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
What about, I was going to ask about Mother Mary and Mother
Right.
Earth.
Right. Yes. And so, one of the things I spoke about already was the notion of a fractal. And a fractal is a pattern that repeats at an infinite number of scales. And so we're surrounded by fractals. If you look at, for instance, time as we calculate it is fractal. And so, an hour is composed of minutes, which are composed of seconds, or you took like the cosmos itself. So beginning with an atom is a nucleus, with subatomic particles whirling about it. You upgrade that a little bit, and now you have like a planet with moons spinning around it. You go up to the next level, and you've got a sun with planets spinning around it. And then you go up to the next level, and you've got a galaxy with solar systems spinning around it. And then finally, you've got a black hole in space with galaxies spinning around it. So you have the same pattern, the spin pattern at every level. Now, the same thing is true then for motherhood in some senses, that you have this fractal where Mother Mary, I think, was part of a cohort. I think there were 4 great souls that came in 2,000 years ago to try to significantly impact the evolutionary trajectory of the planet. And the 4 of them were Jesus, his mother, Mary of Magdala, and John, the beloved disciple. And these are the 3 that are at the cross when he's actually dying. And so they came in as a cohort group in order to jumpstart, the stuck wheels of human spirituality. And so Mother Mary then in some senses represents, that. She's a fractal of that movement. And that's a fractal of what the planet came to do, 4.6 billion years ago, to throw up a life form that would be capable of recognizing its own inner divinity and ipso facto, the inner divinity of all other beings with whom we share the planet. So in that sense, Mother Mary is a fractal of Gaia, and Gaia is a fractal of the womb of God. So it's the same pattern repeated at many, many different scales.
Mm-hmm. And I heard in some of your talks that you talked of your grandmother, Muddy. She had a
Yes.
very
Yeah.
deep
She had extraordinary.
relationship with
Yeah,
Mother Mary.
absolutely. She was actually my great grandmother. She was my father's grandmother, and I was nearly 10 years old before she died. I was born October 1946, and she died in June 1956. And so for the first 6 years of my life, I lived with my paternal grandparents, and my great grandmother was part of that group. And so she would talk aloud to Mother Mary throughout the day. And for her, Mother Mary was more real than you are to me, Kerry. And she would talk aloud throughout the day. And as a little child, I presumed that this was the norm, that the veil was very thin. And so that you could be in dialogue with beings at the other side of the veil. And so she had this extraordinary devotion to Mother Mary. And I picked that up, obviously, energetically. And so for me then, a prayer like the Rosary is the recognition of the fact that, Mary is the mother of God, not in the sense that a human woman could give birth to a divine creature while not being divine herself, but the realization rather that Mary, like every single one of us, is an incarnation of the divine, but that most of us are asleep at the wheel. We don't realize who we are. We get identified with our physicality. We're kind of like skin encapsulated egos, or we get identified with our relationships, or we get identified with our thoughts, or we get identified with our professions, and we're not any of these things. And so there's this great statement it's in Luke's gospel where Jesus says, you must be compassionate as your heavenly Father is compassionate. Now, Jesus is not speaking in Greek, he's speaking in Aramaic. And the word that he's actually using for father is Abba, or Abrom. And that really means it's a non-gender specific word meaning birthing principle of the cosmos. So when Jesus is talking about the Father, he's not using a gender term. He's using the kind of the birthing principle of the cosmos, that which gave life to everything that exists. And he's saying, you must be like that. Now, the word in Aramaic for compassion is the word rachamim. And rachamim is the plural of the Aramaic word for a womb. So here's Christ saying, you must be womb-like, just as the birthing principle of the cosmos is a womb-like. Now, what is a womb? A womb is that which can conceive and carry and give birth sequentially, not just once, but many times perhaps. And so Christ is saying, you must be womb-like. You must keep giving birth. We start off, we give birth to an ego. Then we give birth to relationships. Then we give birth to our ideas. Then we give birth to our professions. And Christ is saying, you must continue to give birth until you give birth to God. The entire trajectory of planet Earth and the human beings is to grow until every single one of us gives birth to God. There was a great Christian mystic, Meister Eckhart, in the 1300s, who in a very famous Christmas homily, he said, of what use to me is it that my Savior was born of a virgin 1300 years ago? If he's not born again in my times and in my heart, every single one of us is meant to be a mother of God. And that's literally true. Every single one of us is meant to be a mother of God. And that's what Christa consciousness means. That's what Mary, the mother of Jesus, meant. Not that she just gave birth to a carpenter's son called Jesus, but that she was the conduit for the divine to flow into the world. And that every single one of us is meant to be the conduit through which the divine flows into the world. So I don't know how familiar you are with the Catholic Rosary, the various mysteries, the joyful mysteries. There are 5 of them. The first one is the Visitation, where Mary, the angel Gabriel, is sent to Mary to ask if she would agree to be the mother of the Mashiach. Now, that's an invitation to kind of conceive God in our heart. Every one of us gets the same invitation. The second one is the Visitation, where she visits her cousin Elizabeth, an old woman who is long beyond menopause, who suddenly finds herself pregnant with the soon-to-be John the Baptist. And it's interesting that Elizabeth says to her, when the sound of your greeting reached my ears, the child in my womb leaped for joy. It's as if the God in Mary, recognized the God in Elizabeth. That John the Baptist in utero represented, recognized Christ in utero, because they're both God stuff. So that was the second. The third one is the Nativity, where Mary now gives birth to the child Jesus. So now she's birthing that which she agreed to conceive. She's giving it to the world, which every single one of us is meant to do. Then the fourth one is the presentation in the temple. Now she's going to induct him into a wisdom tradition, because every child needs to be raised in some kind of a wisdom tradition. So she's presented in the temple at the age of 8 days. So now he's going to be educated in the wisdom tradition of Judaism. But at the age 12, he's lost in the temple and he's debating with the wise men. And then possibly he goes to Egypt or to Tibet or India to interact with the great teachers there. And so now he's coming to the realization that we have to transcend the wisdom tradition of our birth, not abandon it, but transcend it. Means to include, but go beyond. And so you're going to now find elements of his teaching that are reminiscent of Buddhism and Hinduism. So for me, Mary represents that trajectory. Every single one of us has been visited by the angel Gabriel. We have all been asked, will you be the mother of God? And the soul said, yes, I will. Then we come onto planet Earth, and now we begin to realize, that other people had the same invitation, and the God in them recognizes the God in me. So we say in Hinduism, Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you, Kerry. So that's the kind of the Visitation. And then there's the actual birthing. What am I doing in the real world to bring that reality to bear? And you're doing it precisely with the project that you're creating right now. The fourth one is then every little child needs to be inducted into a wisdom tradition so that there's some guidance, because religion is the training wheels for spirituality. But when we have learned the lessons of religion, then we need to go where nobody has ever gone before, because you're on a new journey. And so now you're going to look at different cosmologies and different spiritual systems and cross-fertilize them until you find the one that makes your soul sing. So every one of us is meant to kind of recapitulate what Mary did and what Jesus did.
And I feel like if this was shared the way that you have shared it, we'd have a stronger world.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know. Uh-huh.
Well, you're certainly playing your role in that, Kerry. This extraordinary conference you're putting up.
Well, it's strange, you know, because it's sort of like when you have things happen to you, you can't go backwards. It's like when you're given a light, you're not allowed to. It's about more than you. That's the way I would put it. When you receive that light, it's about more than you, so much more.
Absolutely.
And you still have to do your work. So, you know, you still have to do your work to sort of speak it, to really,
Exactly.
you know, like I know the core through my own experiences. I know the core of everything comes back to love.
Absolutely.
Whatever this is all about, it all comes back to love. And I think it's it's connected in with like our experience. We have different experiences, but all things, they're either a pushing away of love or a coming to love.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
And it's fascinating to me that when people like you begin your journey, you know, and undertake some projects such as you're doing right now, you're going to attract a whole bunch of other people. Your tribe will gather around you, and I'm using tribe in the very best sense of the word. You know, your fellow light bringers are going to recognize you and what you're doing, and they will congregate around you. You know, and you'll become part of this extraordinary, this kind of neural secretary of the planet itself, that's connecting all the great ideas and all the loving ideas into a kind of a divine matrix.
Yeah, and it's about it's about it's about connection.
Absolutely.
That's what it is. It's totally and utterly about our connection with each other, and that we've forgotten it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
And I don't know why that word, because I know that's what it's about, but that word sort of seemed to disappear for a minute, but it come back to me.
That's awesome. I mean, literally, I think it's a global brain, and that each of us is a kind of a synapse, you know, and the synapses are being connected. And now that's the great beauty of the movement between the biosphere and the noosphere, this sheath of consciousness, which is now coming into being around the planet. Because in spite of all the difficulties of it, it's also creating the possibility of these connections that you mentioned. So connection is a great word, because it's like it's a neuronal link between the different light workers who are temporarily kind of scattered around the globe. One of the great visions I had many years ago of Gaia was I had a vision of the planet, the entire planet, like I was looking at it from outer space. And I could see the lines of latitude and the lines of longitude. And at every intersection point between a line of latitude and a line of longitude, there was a being of light stationed. And there was one at the North Pole and one at the South Pole. So the planet itself is surrounded by these light beings, like angelic beings. And when the vision was over, I calculated how many that was. And it was 64,442. Now that's just a symbolic number, obviously, but that's the number of light beings. We're not doing this on our own, even on planet Earth. Even the 8 billion of us that volunteered to be here now and to kind of create this movement, we're not alone. There are these light beings, these angelic forms surrounding and protecting and guiding and offering assistance. So it becomes very, very important then that we continue to communicate with those and ask for their help so that they can point out to us other, you know, light beings on the planet whom we are meant to meet, with whom we are meant to be in dialogue, and with whom we're meant to do projects of various kinds that can move us into the next stage of human evolution.
Yeah. And the power of intention.
Yes.
Like, a
Yes.
lot of people don't understand how powerful that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
There was a lovely man now, he passed away some months ago, back in 2012. He came to Ireland and did a workshop. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He was called Pierre Pravident, and he wrote the book The Gentle Art of Blessing.
No, I didn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
He would have created blessing circles all around various parts of the globe through sharing
Okay.
his heart journey. And I remember, you know, back in 2012, whenever he actually came to Ireland, and I still find it hard to word it, to talk about it with people, but it is inside me. It's there, like this wee furnace or this wee fire in my belly. But because of this particular man all those years ago, I had an experience of the Christ consciousness. And like, there's no words for it. But I do remember the reason he popped into my head, you talked about your vision and all the lines. And I remember during that particular workshop, you know, finding myself outside the planet. And I
Right.
remember, you know, finding myself, he was talking about the town, the village, but I was outside the planet and I knew I was throwing waves of blessings to the
Wow.
planet.
Wow.
And you know, I think this is why he popped up in my mind as you shared about, you know, the reality. It's really there.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful,
Yeah.
Gary. So I think
I
part of the reason why there's such assistance available for us is that I think that when souls volunteer for incarnation in this 3D density, they're very, very brave souls. You know, other levels, you know, fifth and sixth and seventh dimensions, you know, there's less and less density. There's less and less amnesia for who we really are. So for a soul to volunteer to sink down to the 3D density, it takes very, very brave souls to do that. The
yeah,
problem is most of us have amnesia for the fact of who we really are, where we've come from, and what our mission is. But I think that those at the higher dimensions are filled with this extraordinary admiration for the people who volunteered for life on planet Earth. So I like to take this phrase of Jesus where he says, "No, there is no greater love than to lay down your life for your friend." I think there is a greater love. And the greater love than that is to volunteer for human incarnation, to lay down your inner divinity and kind of accept temporarily to be a human being, to be broken like we are, to operate from this tiny little laptop that we carry between our ears, to shrink our cosmic being down to these little spacesuits, to kind of to have amnesia for who we really are. That's a kind of a level of courage and a level of love that just giving your life for somebody, you know, is much greater than even giving your life. It is laying aside your divinity in order to adopt humanity. That's
yeah, that
extraordinary.
is so beautifully
Extraordinary.
put. That is so
Yeah.
beautifully put, because it's so true. Every single soul is so precious, so beautiful, and so brave to
Right.
be here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they don't know themselves, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Seán,
It's
for
been a lovely
joining me
conversation. Thank you.
today. Yeah, just to close up our talk today, I would very much like to invite all of our listeners to check out your website, which is www.spiritsinSpacesuits.com, where there is a free substantial library of video archives, which include topics where Seán shares about Celtic spirituality before Christianity and taking a breather between incarnations. I could spend hours, days. I have to find some more time to get through it all. And also want to mention the companionsonthejourney.org. And this is a unique community which supports each of us in finding and following our own spiritual path. And just thank you so much, Seán, for being present with us today, sharing all of your beautiful wisdom, your beautiful heart. Thank you so, so much.
A big, big hug to you, Carrie.
Big hug back.
Okay.
Thank
God
you
bless
so
you.
much.
Namaste.
Namaste.